Welcome to Circle of Hearts Radio. Journey with Grandmother Allayah as she enters her magical world of relics, sacred sites, and ancient crystal skulls. Meet with exciting trailblazer authors and individuals shifting the consciousness of humanity. Send her your questions to be answered on air on her monthly segment, Ask the Oracle. And now your host, Grandmother Allayah, in the sanctuary on the airwaves on OMTimes Radio.
Welcome to Circle of Hearts on OMTimes Radio. I am Allayah, your host for this hour. Welcome to my sanctuary. This sun. Oh, I can't even say sunny. It's on the East Coast, it's cloudy and rainy, but we have a lot of energy going on in this room, so it's very sunny. As I always mention, that on these shows, they're very spirit-driven. And again, that's how I end up meeting the people that I bring on. This is the case with Nicholas Pearson. I've known Nicholas over the years. He was on my skull form and we talked about, Himalayan course. But I really didn't get a chance to know him. And then one day, as I was talking to him in pre-show, I said, I'm on Facebook, and there he is on my feed. And I get the idea, well, I got to contact him. And I did, and he goes, oh, I was thinking about you. Okay, so here we are. Spirit at work again. Now, Nicholas, he's becoming one of the emerging new voices in the crystal skull community. He's been doing a lot of background research, learning, teaching, workshops, etc. And now he's written a book. What's the Crystal Teachings, the Mystery Teachings of the Mineral Kingdom?
That's the working title, yeah.
Okay. And when is this book going to come out?
I'm still in the process of finishing it up, so I should be getting it to my publisher relatively soon, and then maybe about a year for production, maybe less. I don't really know what the timeline's going to be on that, but I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, no, too, because I told you I want one. But like I said, I've known you, and yet I really didn't know you. I didn't know the depth of your experience and your work with crystals. What attracted you to the crystal consciousness, just to begin with?
It started when I was a young child. I was always the kind of kid who would pick up rocks off the side of the road or out of people's driveways. And I can remember I was maybe about age 8. My grandfather gave me my first piece of quartz. It is one of the crowning jewels of my collection to this day, and that really transformed it. I was lucky enough to come from a household that encouraged me, always wanting to learn something new, and I always took that opportunity.
And we have so much to really talk about. When you got involved with crystals, you really are getting involved more in depth. In your book, you're showing people not just to take this, the surface definition of them. Is this what you're trying to express?
Yeah, my work over the years has always been sort of progressively peeling the onion layer by layer, and it might have started out with that sort of surface level knowledge, learning about folklore and healing stones, and we add a little bit of science in there, and then it's drawing the bridge between science and spirit, and now it's really like cultural archetypes and how those even can convey the same messages that the scientific archetypes, the spiritual archetypes do. So yeah, I really want to help people get a more intimate connection with the mineral kingdom by learning to experience them on a more intimate level.
What do you mean by archetypes?
So, for example, this book that I'm working on starts with the idea of obsidian, and this had such universal applications in human cultures that they really are cultural archetypes. They're artifacts that are archetypal in virtually every culture that was exposed to obsidian. So for obsidian, it being an opening chapter, it's a tough stone. It's one that is reflective, it is sharp, and those are the two major things that the the book focuses on as obsidian as a cutting tool and obsidian as a mirror, and it can reflect our shadows and also help hone our mind so it has the sharpness and precision that we need. So on the one hand, I'm looking at actual physical archetypes left over in the remains of human history, but I'm also talking about spiritual archetypes and how these stones and their physical manifestations represent our spiritual evolution.
No, I enjoyed that, that combination, and also bringing in the cultural. Now, obsidian, when you were thinking of that, I was thinking of, and it's probably even before that when you're saying cutting tools, probably the cavemen,
Hmm.
used
Yeah, it
obsidian.
as early back as people were enchanted by this stone because it broke more easily than other things. Being a natural glass, it doesn't have the tenacity of a true crystal because it lacks the structure of it. But because of that and the way it fractures, you can make incredibly deft cutting blades. In fact, there are actually some recent applications where surgical scalpels have been made from obsidian. Currently, they're only approved for veterinary use, but that may be something that we see for human surgery as well, because you can actually make a sharper, thinner, safer blade than you can from surgical steel.
Wow. And I don't know what blows my mind on that. I always think of crystals, as a viable consciousness, you know, almost like this is my 2 cents, a living entity. All right.
Hmm.
So if you were to bring using obsidian, it seems like it would be, in using surgery, it would be less invasive to the human body because the human body is becoming crystalline in nature. So they might be more aligned. Maybe, somehow. Oh, I know I'm off on a rant here.
No, I mean, I think you're really onto something. Um, the way that we can interact on that spiritual level with the physical action of the surgery is something that might actually be um, better for the recuperation process afterwards. I mean,
Yeah, the healing process. Yeah.
for one, because it's a potentially a safer material. The physical recuperation would be a lot faster because it's got less sort of accessory damage that can go on. But the other part of it is energetically speaking. Um, this is a really deeply healing tool. And cultures all over the world actually carried obsidian when it was in blade form to prevent accidents and to prevent the need for healing. So it's almost like combining corrective and preventative care all in one.
It was. I've seen it. I mean, I'm just curious myself. Obsidian. I've seen crystal blaze used, in energetic work.
Hmm.
Do you think obsidian was part of it? When people do psychic surgery, or I mean, I know I'm kind of bringing this in left field, but came to my mind.
Oh, definitely. In my upcoming work, I'll give some examples on how you can actually use tools like obsidian not just for the sort of meditative or spiritual growth purpose, but how they have hands-on applications like spiritual surgery, like cutting away negative thought forms, helping us release the parts of our lives that aren't serving us, so that way we can really embrace what's new and grow. And I think that's one of the core uses of them in the shamanic traditions too.
Hmm. That's, like I said, this is a whole fascinating subject on this. So this is sort of like the subject matter that you're expressing in this book that's coming out.
Yes. After obsidian, we go into jade, and jade was
Oh
the
yeah, Jade.
Stone Age equivalent of steel. I mean, as useful as obsidian was, jade was so many times harder. It's actually harder than steel. So they were able to make a lot of the same tools a lot more refined.
What I'm wondering about Jade, I know Neolithic Jade, or the very earlier Jade, if you can maybe clarify, like mutton chop.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with that? That's a
I
soft
am.
jade.
Jade comes in two primary forms. Rather than for example, quartz, which is always the same chemical structure, it's always the same mineral. It just comes in a lot of colors. Jade is actually a term that's applied to a broad category of rocks. There are two true forms of jade. There's jadeite and nephrite. Nephrite's actually a mixture of two different minerals, and it is a little bit softer than the precious jade or the nephrite jade. The nephrite has sort of like a fine-grained texture where they're interlocking grains. Like, imagine if you magnified it, it might look like grains of sand pressed against each other and sealed together. Whereas the, that's the jadeite. Whereas the nephrite is actually like fine hairs or twisted fibers that are felted together that form the mass of it. So while the precious jadeite is actually stronger in terms of its hardness, nephrite jade, the semi-precious version of jade, is tougher and more resilient because those fibers are so well penetrating. A bunch of other things get called jade. For example, serpentine in a lot of its forms can be called jade or new jade. There are rocks that contain either primarily nephrite or primarily jadeite mixed with other minerals that can be softer because they're sort of diluted, and those will be called jades as well. And there are a bunch of other things. There's
we're going to end up with a break, so
okay.
See what I mean? Goes off
Yes,
fast.
It does.
But I'd like to explain maybe a little bit more on the mutton shop, because to me it has such a different feel after this upcoming break.
You got it.
Now I'm waiting for the music. Of course, it's not going to come. But all right, maybe I can blabber here a little bit before, because my white skull. That's mutton chop, and
yeah, she's beautiful.
She has such a. Now she's from the Shang Dynasty, which is very Neolithic, BC time. Here's music, but she feels soft. So carrying on that thought until after the commercial.
Alrighty.
Best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
The truth is, you can't change the world if you're broke. I know, I've tried. Isn't it time you turned your life's calling into a profitable, freedom-based business? I'm Michelle Barr. Join me every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern for Sacred Success.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network. Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Okay, we're back with Nicholas Pearson, and I'm picking his brain today on two of my favorite subjects, jade and the Himalayan quartz. But what I was wondering about, Nicholas, was on the white mutton shop. Now, all the books that I've read, that they say some jade in its purity is white, and it's because it's so porous that it absorbs the mineralogy or the environment around it. Does that make sense?
does. So most mutton chop jade is the sort of semi-precious variety, the original jade that has been worked for a lot longer, and that's called nephrite. And it's got that sort of a translucence to it when it's got a really good polish to it. But a lot of these jades that have been found in tombs and other burial sites are coated in iron oxides and other things because they've interacted with the earth. Jade is one of those things that's sort of ever changing. It is always responding to its environment, and it is, because of its fibrous structure, a little bit more porous than, let's say, quartz would be, for example. And so they kind of build these sort of almost like a crust on the outside. It's an oxidation layer.
Yeah, I found that out. I have a biodisc, a jade biodisc, and a lot of these pieces were used in funeral rituals. And the symbology of the biodisc circle within a circle, it was placed on the deceased. And usually these people were either a royalty or, somebody in position always were involved in jade. And the jade biodisc has that patina, that brown patina all over it. And you can see in parts of it, the nephrite coming, through. So, a lot of pieces I have here have those patinas that are the jade. So I'm glad you brought that out.
Yeah. It's one of the things that jade collectors often is the way they sort of evolve over time and take on that new appearance. And it's sort of a reminder to us, jade, to a lot of ancient cultures, because it was so difficult to carve and so durable, they considered it to be a representation of eternity, of the spark within us that is undying, but also of the promised land, the paradise, the heaven realms that were eternal, even the dream time, which is always changing, but ever present and eternal. So when we see these objects that last for eternities, because they really take a lot to break down in nature, they still get that patina. So it reminds us that we go through changes in life, and we might experience something that on the surface looks as if it's changing, but at the core remains constant.
That's a beautiful way of expressing that. So we're going to do a show on jade another time.
Definitely.
I want to bring up Himalayan quartz, another one of my passions. And, Nicholas is one of the few people that I can talk to about it. I'm sure there's a lot of others, but our thoughts are so much aligned with it, especially with the crystal skulls. Now, quartz doesn't necessarily get a patina.
Not generally speaking. There are a few quartz artifacts that definitely are patinaed because they're not, super high polish. They have that sort of matte finish, and that'll pick up things. But quartz doesn't patina the same way because, it's stable. It doesn't oxidize. It's a really, really durable and stable compound. So on the chemical side of things, it doesn't want to interact with its environment, chemically speaking. And because of that, when you carve something out of quartz, it literally appears to last forever, unless, of course, you drop it.
Yeah, quartz does break or chip. One thing that's interesting when we get into the Himalayan quartzes, I have 3 Himalayan skulls. Now, they have a patina on them. Now, my mentor, Gary Butler, who has passed on, when he was talking to the Hopi elders, they said that certain skulls would have they had a resin covering placed on them to protect their light from the world. I guess to hide their light from the world. Because in Buddhist traditions, a lot of things were put in another dimension to be called back at the appropriate times. The tulkas, is that it?
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of cultures around the world that really work very hard to protect their mystery teachings. And, that sort of patina would make something that's transparent and so radiant and luminous, the way quartz, especially if it's of optical quality, would be, seem as if it's ordinary stone. But on the other hand, I think there may actually, in some of these resins, have been things like psychoactive compounds. So actually holding and meditating with them while holding or rubbing the surface might actually have induced a deeper and more profound meditative state.
I noticed with the again the Himalayans. Now, when I got them, like I said, they had this patina. It
Hmm.
just looked like a rough covering. And when Gary, before he passed, he cleaned one of my skulls, and it has a beautiful, clear quality with these, white cloud inclusions, we would call. But the ones with the patina, I notice when meditating and I hold it, actually from the heat of my hands or for the quartz or something kind of interaction going on,
Hmm.
the patina disappears.
Yeah, I mean, it may be our skin actually absorbing some compounds in it. They're mostly plant-based resins, but on the spiritual level, it may be, something that's not describable by the laws of physics taking place. That's always a possibility too.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm always amazed. But getting back with the Himalayan course, a lot of people that are familiar with the stories with the Himalayan quartz and Frank, who brought them over or to recognition. I had discussed with Nicholas that I want to let you know that these aren't exclusive. There's a lot of spiritual relics made in Nepal out of Himalayan quartz. And I'd like you to talk about your crystal skull. Mustang? I'm never
Yes.
going to get it right.
That's okay. So several years ago, I was in Japan, and while I was there, I was gifted with a quartz crystal skull. Some months earlier, a friend of mine had acquired it and wanted me to come retrieve it. We didn't feel comfortable putting it in the mail or flying it home with anyone else, so I actually had to go to Japan. I mean, it's a terrible excuse, right?
Oh, yeah.
Go to Japan, this beautiful country, to reclaim this ancient relic. So Mustang is a little smaller than life size. He's not quite the size of an adult skull. Weighs somewhere in the vicinity of 6 pounds, and is sort of a clear to milky Himalayan quartz. And it looks as if, based on inclusions and the types of things present in the quartz, that he might be from Ganesh Himal, which has fairly large deposits of quartz, larger size crystals than some of the other ones. If not, it might be from Kangchenjunga, which is also in the Himalayas. But Mustang is interesting. He wasn't, part of the sort of cache of artifacts that Frank Lu brought with those other Himalayan skulls, but he was actually in consistent ritual use. A lot of these skulls that have been found worldwide are things that have been sort of forgotten relics or kept in a closet or, hidden by a family or even dug up from underground. Very few of them actually stay in sacred space and are used consistently in ritual. But Mustang is kind of unique in that way. So because of that, he doesn't have the sort of sleepy state that a lot of crystal skulls, when they're discovered, are in when they require activation. He's fairly active on his own. But
I was going to say, he's present with you right now, too.
he is, yes. I'm holding him as we speak. But
No, I was going to say, did your friend, before we head to another break, tell you where he got it?
yeah, so he was. There was a seasonal market that was taking place in the area of Japan that he was staying in, and there was an antiquities dealer from the Himalayas there, and they sort of bumped into each other, and one thing led to another when my friend saw the crystal skull, and that was just, fate. Ordinarily, most of the vendors pack up pretty early in Japan. Temples close very promptly at 5, markets close very promptly at 5, and the only vendor still packing things up a little past 5 was someone not from Japan. And so he'd found it with a bunch of other artifacts in a market back in Nepal. And this skull came from a province that's called Mustang. Mustang is actually one of the nicknames for it is the Tibet outside of Tibet. When the Chinese occupation started, a lot of refugees went there to preserve their history, their spiritual traditions, their language, their culture. And so they brought a lot of sacred things with them. And it's likely that Mustang could have come over at that time. Either way, he's been in Nepal for a while. And the vendor, the antiquities dealer, knew that he was at least 400 years old, but some other estimates that I've gotten, scientific and intuitive and everything in between, put him closer at about 1,000 to 1,500 years old.
I know nobody really. There has, just before we head to break again, always amazes me. They always say they can't figure out dates for quartz or, especially quartz. But no one recognizes the intuitive. Like you have many talented clairvoyants that, holding something through psychometry can see almost like a remote view or, get a timeline, but it's not recognized. So, that's just a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah, I think when we study something as multidimensional as the crystal skulls, we have to use every available resource, and that includes our intuitive resources in order to try to place them and date them and get some timeline. There are always going to be gaps in the history of these artifacts, so the more that we can fill, even if it requires a leap of faith, I think the better off we're going to be.
Well, it's good bringing out this because on the next break, I like to talk about, even when talking with Liz Hamilton the week before, she has some beautiful Tibetan decorated skulls, jewel encrusted, and they were used in ritual. And I think, just in this area in Buddhism, just even talk about how crystal skulls were used by the monks is, a whole another subject line.
Yeah, definitely.
But I'd like to touch upon that because you mentioned, him being, I say him, but it's probably, more universal than him, being used in ritual and
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. Simone Milasas would like you to know that business can be fun, which is why she wrote the book, Joy of Business. What if you could have the joy of business rather than the stress and struggle? Most of the time, the only thing stopping you from a thriving business is you. In the Joy of Business book, Simone gives you access consciousness tools and pragmatic ways to get out of your own way and to create the business, life, and living you know is possible and beyond what this reality says is achievable. Business is joy. It's creation. It's generative. It can be the adventure of living. You can purchase your copy of the book through Amazon or Joy of Business website, www.accessjoyofbusiness.com.
Hi, I'm Katrina Kavanagh, host of the I Am Wisdom radio show. I Am Wisdom is about the connection between mind work and energy work, spirituality, and living a wonderful life. Looking forward to sharing each Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with you.
Hi, this is Angela Levesque, host of Entanglement Radio. Join me Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern for inspiring conversations with visionaries in spiritual science and conscious healing. Entanglement Radio, Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. Transcendent talk for the conscious mind.
Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community. Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
well, we're back and we're touching upon lightly on so many subjects. Too much information to get in, and this time's going too quickly, right, Nick?
Yeah.
Ritual. Now, from my perspective, I've always seen quartz, whether it's Brazilian quartz, which has a much brighter, clearer feel, and versus Himalayan quartz, which to me has more of a softer feminine feel. And jade are always been used in some kind of spiritual carving or relic or shamanic description, more than you would find maybe in rose quartz or other citrine or etc. But there's an interesting link between quartz skulls and the monks, whether the Tibetan monks or whether Bonpo shamanism with jade, etc. Have you any thoughts on that, or
I do. I've gotten little snippets of information between interviewing people from Himalayan traditions, antiquities dealers, research in books and online. And so there's no complete picture we can paint about the use of especially crystal skulls. That's definitive from a scholarly or academic standpoint, but some of the gaps we've been able to fill in are things like this, for example. Most of the practitioners who use quartz skulls are specifically using them in rituals of Tantra. So Tantra means union, and it generally refers to a union with the divine consciousness. And so these are really deep esoteric rituals. When you see like the tankas or the paintings that are made in Tibetan traditions, and there are a lot of really interesting complex deities and mandalas that feature skulls in them. They're usually human skulls, bone skulls, but one level deeper would be to transform those bone ritual elements into quartz ones. And that was something that was done in part because bone will eventually break down no matter how well cared for it is. It does begin to decompose, even if just little by little, whereas the quartz remains eternal. You can't really wear it down from the daily wear and tear. When I was out in Tucson, I actually got to, I say play, but I got to work with very briefly some human bone ritual implements from Tibet and Nepal, things like kapalas, which are ritual vessels like bowls and cups and plates that are made from the human cranium. Some of them are very small and they're used in personal rituals, but the larger, full bowl shape of the top of the cranium is used inside monasteries. And then things like kongling, which are trumpets that are made from the femur bones. But that embracing of symbols of death and elements of death and dying show us that tantric traditions recognize that physical death is really just part of the life cycle. They don't view it as a setback or the end of a cycle, except wherein a new cycle begins. And so the crystal skull takes that a little bit deeper. Instead of just embracing our own mortality, it shows us that literally there's a part of us that is luminous and eternal, something that doesn't break down, something that is so universal and pervasive. And by working with the crystal skulls, these traditions are all about illumination of the higher spiritual planes. They literally bring human consciousness, the symbol of the skull, the seat of our brain, into the realms of the spiritual or the light fields, the light planes, the worlds of our divine origin.
Now, what's interesting, what's flowing through my mind, I mean, we talk about, let's say, the Himalayan skull. So I had a show with Dean Jamel, and we talked about the Song of Jeshua. And part of her channeled recollection in this book was during the lost years of, Jesus, that he traveled into the Himalayas underneath, in all the tunnels. And there was a whole, I mean, a lot of times I know this is branching off, but a lot of the crystal tools from the Himalayas, sometimes I associate them with Argatha or the underworld cities, within the core. Have you ever heard that, or?
I have. It's not something I've really spent a lot of time with just yet. But even to the early Christian church, symbols of the skull were really important symbols of salvation, reminders again of our renewed life as we enter the spiritual realms. So I could see how maybe there's a little bit of permeability between those two cultures and how they could have influenced one another.
Yeah, I mean, now if we go into the skull, I know we're jumping all over here because of me. Go to Brazilian quartz.
Hmm.
What differences do you find between, let's say, the Himalayan and the Brazilian? Because you have Brazilian quartz and you have Mitchell Hedges skull, but then you have Himalayan quartz, which I believe maxes.
Um, Short of doing things like X-ray diffraction, which would require you shaving off a piece of a crystal skull and powdering it and bombarding it with X-rays, it's hard to tell exactly where a skull comes from. We can magnify things and kind of make assumptions based on its mineral content that we can see, but otherwise it's hard to really find that origin. Now, when it comes to the ones that we know their origin, because they've come out of those regions, there is definitely a marked energy difference.
Yeah,
Generally
energetic.
speaking,
Yeah.
yeah, generally speaking, I find a lot of the Himalayan quartzes to be a lot softer. There are a few exceptions. The stuff out of Ganesh Himal is soft, but still very strong because it comes from such a high altitude and such relative purity, and it's so respectfully harvested. Brazilian quartz, though, it's hard to put it all in one group. If you're talking about the vast majority of stuff coming out of like Minas Gerais, um, the name of that area, that region, literally just means general mines in Portuguese. They do have a fairly cohesive energy, and it is a little bit more laser-like in its focus, a little bit more masculine, a little bit more dominant. But there are other regions like Cerro do Cobrao has phenomenal quartzes. That's where some of the original Lemurian seed crystals came from, and they're soft and feminine and receptive. If you go up into the northern parts of Brazil, if you ever get specimens from there, they have a very different feel than some of the other regions. So I think Brazil, because it's so large, produces so many different personalities in its
Yeah.
crystals.
And it really amazing listening to, because I always lump, I call Brazilian quartz into one huge general category.
Hmm.
But listening to you, there's a whole range involved.
There is. I mean, just like we're not the same, even if we come from the same city, even two quartz crystals harvested at the same time by the same person of equal size are going to be very different.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm learning here. Oh, but even what about the Lemurian quartz? Where is that coming out of?
Um, I mean, properly in most books, you'll find out that it comes from very select regions in Brazil. And, the story goes that they're purportedly found loose in the sand, growing like seeds. And there's a little bit of truth to that. And then there's also a little bit of exaggeration there. The original quartzes were found relatively loose in the sand in the original areas. The original mines, they're still actually mined that way. They use long hoses. They sort of blast with water, so it's a lot gentler than other forms, the sand away. And apparently the miners who do this, even to this day, get genuinely excited every time they pull a crystal out. Like, you see the joy, and that's why those old school Lemurians have such a joyful feel to them. In recent years, that small area, which is mostly mined out, has some sort of accessory mining locations, things that are right off the side, and we keep finding new and new types of Lemurians, ones that have green phantoms, one that are called strawberry Lemurians, and they're sort of a reddish pink color.
Yeah, where did they get that color from? Because I have some of them myself.
That's actually from iron oxide. It's the same thing that makes golden healer quartz gold or tangerine quartz orange. So iron compounds come in a lot of different forms. It's basically just fancy rust, but in a mineral sense, this is mostly hematite. So they do add a sort of grounding energy. Iron relates to us so well at the physical level because there's so much of it in our blood that we get this sort of bodily resonance to it. But especially with the strawberry Lemurians, they're so sweet. They've got such a beautiful heart color to them that they really help us bring a little bit more joy and spontaneity into our hearts.
Now, like I said, we're winding down again. But out of all the crystals, what is your favorite? Now, I know that's a hard one.
It is. It's like asking a parent which child is their favorite. I would say if we're just talking about quartz and only quartz, my absolute favorite would probably have to be, um, it's a really tough one. I'm really partial to some of the Brazilian cathedrals and celestials because they're just so complex. But the Himalayan quartz, especially from Ganesh Himal Pass, has got to be right up there on top.
Well, you can have two favorites, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, when I asked you that question, I was thinking myself, if someone asked me that, well, for me, it's jade. I don't know why. I'm going to tell you, years ago, I didn't know anything about jade, but right now, I'm just, jade crazy. But that's why I was kind of curious how of all the ones that you've worked with and you researched with, what would be your favorite? Like I said, we'll let you have two.
Okay. Well, if we broaden it, if it's not just quartz, I actually do have a favorite. It's an unusual cousin of tigerite. It's called petersite, and it comes from Namibia in southern Africa.
Mhm.
And I saw my first piece when I was maybe 12 or 13, and I have been just enchanted by it ever since.
That has like multiple colors in it, right? I think I have a piece like that too.
Yeah, generally speaking, it's as if you imagine tiger eye in every color of the rainbow, melted them down and poured them into one stone. Just it's molten and fiery. They call it the tempest stone or the
Yeah.
storm stone, and I just can never get enough.
I think I also like the golden healers. That's just it's different than citrine.
It is.
The energies are so different, but it's just a comforting stone. But yeah, no, I mean we could. That's why I'm really glad you're writing this book because you're going to be offering such a variety of hands-on information. Oh, here we are again. In the next segment, everybody gets pen pad because he's going to give you some information how you can contact him and about his book.
Bringing you the best of the conscious minds in the world. OMTimes Radio, your conscious lifestyle on steroids. The number one reason girls drop out of school in sub-Saharan Africa is lack of access to feminine hygiene products. The Pads for Schoolgirls Project, an outreach of Humanity Healing International, is changing this paradigm by setting up sewing programs at schools, teaching girls a vocational skill, while producing the reusable pads that help keep them attending classes. The girls pay it forward by making and giving pad kits to other girls in need. To learn more, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Radio Namaste leads you down the yellow brick road into portals of consciousness with the blue collar goddess as your host. Interviews with humans who could be famous or just popular, and answers to everything are on the agenda. Tune into OMTimes Radio and drop in on Thursdays at 3 Eastern. It's a different brand of enlightenment.
The Conscious Parenting Radio Show provides inspiration and resources for loving, empowering, and respecting your children and yourself. Join me, Timothy, every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time as we consciously explore proven ways of living together in happiness, health, and harmony.
Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network. Free your mind. Expand your soul. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
Well, we're back in our last segment, and as I promised, Nicholas, this time does fly by.
Yeah.
But what I want you to do is give the listeners some ways of contacting you.
Alrighty. First and foremost, if you find me on Facebook or you can actually find Mustang, the Himalayan crystal skull, on Facebook as well. It's a great way to network and stay abreast of activities that we do. We travel for workshops and other spiritual events. It's just a great way to stay in touch. Whenever I find out news about crystal skulls or other crystal and related topics, they usually get posted there also. And in the future, sometime later this year, I'll also be launching a website. So stay tuned for that too.
How would you spell for them Mustang?
Alrighty, it's Mustang. So just like Mustang, the wild horse or the car, take your pick.
Yeah, that's how I end up saying it. But I'm going, I know I'm saying it wrong.
No worries, you are not alone.
Right, I'm sure he forgives me.
He does. So we'll be easy to find. And I welcome you to participate in our community events.
Yeah, bringing Nicholas on is because there's so many people that have been in the crystal community and in the crystal skull community, and they've been doing their private work and their workshops and constantly evolving. And now, just like I use that favorite saying, emerging from the shadows. And I think Nicholas is a perfect example of this. He's coming out, he's letting his voice be heard in his written work, because now all his work aligns with everybody's development. So all the timing is very perfect. So I'm glad Spirit brought us together, Nicholas.
Me too. Thank you so much.
I'm not quite through with you yet. We actually have, a few more minutes. When you were you also have another aspect of your work of connecting and teaching people Reiki, pretty much connecting to the source. And you have, is that why you're drawn to go to Japan?
It was, ostensibly, on paper, one of the main reasons that I went for Japan, other than because I wanted to be a tourist in Japan and see friends who had moved there, who are very near and dear to me. I also wanted to go connect with the source of Reiki. I've been a Reiki practitioner for almost a decade now. It's not quite, but we're getting close. I started, as a teenager, really, but getting the opportunity to go to Mount Kurama, where Usui Sensei, the founder of Reiki, actually had his enlightenment, or his satori, was this blissful experience. We spent the day in retreat on the mountain in quiet reflection, climbing up one side and coming down the other. I was able to visit his memorial, his actual, his grave, if you will, in Tokyo twice while I was there. We got to participate in Reiki Share with an international group of people from all over the world, and that takes place in Tokyo. And I actually received one of my Reiki Master initiations while I was there.
Wow.
Attending the Reiki Share in a Buddhist temple. So it doesn't really get more Japanese than that.
No, I think it's pretty exciting to actually be involved in the culture that brought this out. I mean, there's been so many flavors of Reiki, but you cannot get past the original, founder.
It's true. And I've just in the last few weeks really been strongly called back to the healing arts, not just for personal practice, but for sharing with others. So, my ability to teach Reiki is something that I have maybe neglected in the past, but now I feel such a strong draw to. So there'll be more and more of that coming out. And I really try to synthesize the best of each branch, the Western Reiki and then, the Eastern Reiki, and just help people find what suits them the best. So it's all about tailoring to my audience and helping people just feel empowered with the tools that are available to them.
Do you add crystals to your Reiki practice?
In my personal practice, I use them so closely together, whether it's just picking my daily gemstones for wear and charging them up with a little bit of Reiki before I put them on, or whether in actual sessions, I'm more inclined to lay gemstones right on the body or do maybe some energy work with them while using hands-on Reiki as well. I find the two to be very complementary.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've noticed some people, I've come across that myself, the use of crystalline energy with Reiki, and it seems so complementary. That's why I was kind of curious with your background, if you ever used it. So and also I notice a lot of us are going back to our healing roots. I find that myself, as being involved with the crystal skulls for, past 15 years. Now I'm starting to get more involved with my Reiki background and with my healing energy background. So I think it's something collective going on. A lot of people I'm talking to are finding themselves being drawn back.
It's very true. And even on Usui Sensei's memorial stone at his gravesite, it was his wish that Reiki could be spread around the world. He wanted this to be a natural, free thing that everyone could just use and practice freely, not just something that was covert or in the minority or considered an alternative way of healing. He wanted it to be a full complement to daily life, and he strongly believed that it was one of the tools that we could use to heal the world.
But I was always interested that people don't, when they think of Reiki, they go, it's a particular discipline. But I always equated to it when they open their hand, your hand chakras. It's the healing touch. A mother touches a child, she's sick. That's connecting through the heart and to a universal source. If people who kind of realize that this is what it's all about, it's not some kind of special alternative thing that's going on, it's something very natural. I think maybe more and more people would use it or allow it just to happen, because some people just spontaneously become interested in it.
Yeah, the old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. When people suddenly are drawn to Reiki, it's almost inescapable. It becomes so easy to follow. And I mean, just now this is happening with me. I'm lucky enough that I get to study a very traditional branch of Reiki coming up later this month that is straight out of Japan.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
You'll have to let us know more about that. I'll be keeping in touch with Nicholas, and he's coming back, so we can go and focus more on one particular subject. A lot of times when I bring somebody on, I just want to introduce them to the world, and we can't go in depth on so many things. So, he's agreed to come back, and, we'll be talking again. So it's been fun.
Yes, it has.
Can you believe how quick it went too?
It's just like the blink of an eye.
So it's but like I said, I want you to keep in touch. I want to know when this book is coming out, because, well, even if you say a year ahead, I mean, I'm not going to wait for that. There'll have to be a third program. We'll talk about your book.
Oh yes. And this is the first of many books as well. I've got a lot of stuff that'll be coming out. There'll be future projects. We'll have plenty to talk about.
Okay, because I'm glad you're adding your voice out there, because people, it's a sharing, from the heart. It's a sharing of your passion, and this is what makes the energy special. It's not just written in an academic form. You include the academics, but you include your own spirituality, which brings a nice signature touch to it. And like I said, I'm thrilled to be able to talk to somebody about Himalayan skulls and jade. So, I'm in my element here. So, I guess I got a few more minutes, and I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to, talk about next week's show, and we'll definitely be in touch again, Nicholas, and you definitely, work out something that we can focus on one particular subject. But today we touched on a lot, and it was really great.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so now next week we have another crystal skull taker, and she really doesn't often. She's bringing that out more. Marlene Switzloff. You know her for her channels of Himalayan and she has gone into healing, and she also is a crystal skull taker. She has worked with compassion, and she's also become familiar with my, Himalayan skulls, and, we're close friends, and she's a very private person, and I'm really, really, really thrilled to get her on the radio. Every time I do, I have to do, practically pull her out of her hiding space out there in Canada. So this will be a very exciting talk because she's a fascinating woman, and of course we'll bring out her connection to the crystal skulls because that's how we met. She had contacted me. She goes, she was drawn to me. She goes for a reading, and my mouth dropped like, oh my God, what in the world can I tell this amazing soul? And it turns out the energy of one of my crystal skulls, Melchizedek, had gone and had drawn her, and she had found one of my old sites, Sanctuary of the Ancients. So we'll continue this story next week. But please look, forward to talking to Marlene. Until then, I wish you love from my heart to yours.